lots of purses. I have tutorials on everything you see here and many more purse tutorials. I have hippie purses, boho bags, festival bags, even vintage lace bags. But the one thing these all have in common is they were made very inexpensively with upcycled, pre-owned, thrifted items like tablecloths, jackets, sweaters, dresses, belts, jewelry. Hi, I'm Tracy. Thank you for joining me. And this is actually the purse we're going to be working on today. So this lovely rustic boho beauty is made from upcycled items as well. It has kind of a furry outside, and that's from the lining of a jacket. I have leather fringe made from another jacket, belts, charms, so many fun details. The strap is made out of a belt. Now these are easier than you might think. If you have a basic knowledge of a sewing machine, you don't have to have any special skills. You just basically need to know the steps it takes to get to this point. And that's what I'm going to show you. I'll do my best to be very detailed and show you step by step what I did. But I'm not like a tailor seamstress where I'm going to say, you need 2 yards of this color and a yard of this and 4 of these. This is art, and you will have your own fabrics and materials. This is made basically, I don't buy patterns. I make very simple patterns. This is made out of a square piece of paper pattern and a rectangle. And at the end of this, I'm going to show you a slideshow of over 40 purses that I've made and sold using the same type of pattern. They'll be a little bit different. Sometimes the flap here is more of a square. Sometimes it's a longer rectangle, but it's all basically the same concept, and they look so different from one another. So be sure to watch that and get inspired by all the different materials and looks that you can get just from a basic square and rectangle pattern. This is the jacket that I want to use for the body of the bag. It's fabric, but it kind of looks like a faux suede, but what I really loved about it was the inside. I love all that detailing. Now this will be the outside of the body of my bag. It's kind of furry and super soft and has all this cool detailing. The first thing I did to get started was to create 2 super simple patterns. One is just a square, 14 by 14 inches. I make mine on craft paper. You can use newspaper, wrapping paper, whatever. And this will be for the body of the bag. And then I made one for the flap of the bag down in front. And it is 10.25 inches tall and 7 inches across. Now I need to make the front and back side of my purse, the body of my bag. And how I get started when I have a jacket is I just cut the sleeves off at the seam on both sides and cut across at the shoulder into the collar. I don't usually use the collar for anything. And I am just going to use my electric scissors, and in case someone's curious, they're Pink Power electric scissors that I get on Amazon. But you can absolutely use the scissors. Now that I have my jacket all cut open and easier to work with, I need to cut out 2 of the 14 by 14 squares. Now the back of the jacket, this will fit nicely. This is a pretty big purse, pretty big pattern. So I don't have enough room on the rest of the jacket for this pattern. So what I'm going to have to do is, here are the sleeves. So I cut them off the jacket, and then I cut open that seam on the underneath side. And I did that on both sleeves. Now I need to make sure this will fit. Yeah, so what I need to do now is just sew these together so that I have a large enough piece for my pattern. And I will sew, this will be my right side because I like that fur and this detail. So I will sew the wrong sides together so that I have another little seam just sticking up here. So I'll go to my machine, and with a brown thread, I'll just stitch that together. I won't pin it or anything, with a fairly small straight stitch right along the side. Okay, so now I have my sleeves all sewn together, and I went to my ironing board, laid a tea towel over top, and just pressed that seam flat. And now what I'm doing is just taking my 14 by 14 pattern, tracing around it. I always use a marker. You can use something like chalk that's a little more forgiving if you like. So I just need to do that twice. I need 2 pieces of this brown fabric. So now I have my 2 pieces of fabric cut out. And at this point, if you'd like to, see, we cut through some seams. And that is what was holding our jacket together. And these could potentially come apart. You can just stitch over top of that, real close to the edge, over top of those seams if you're more comfortable. I normally just wait and see what they're going to do. I feel it out, and if I feel like they're going to come open, then I'll stitch it, but I'll just wait and see. Now all I need to do is choose one of these for the front of my bag. And typically I like the prettiest one for the back of the bag, because the front is usually so decorative that it's almost hidden and the back is a little more visible. So I actually like this one the best. So I'm going to use that for the back. And I am going to start the front of my bag on this piece. The first thing I want to do to the top of my purse here is just put a decorative band close to the top. And what I'm going to use is this snippet roll. So I have 3 of them here, and I did a tutorial on how to make these, and I'll put the link in my description. And real quick, they're basically for people who do junk journaling, crafting, scrapbooking, things like that, but I talk more about that in the video. So I'm going to use the one I created for this purse. Now I just laid my snippet roll on the piece I'm working on, and I just cut it where I needed it. And now I am just going to pin this all the way around. My snippet roll is, or my band is about 3.5 inches wide, and I'm pinning it about 1.5 inches down from the very top of the bag. And I'll just pin that in a few areas, and then I'll go to my machine and I will just do a straight stitch all the way around. Now I may not be able to get through this chunky part. This is a little belt that's on the snippet roll. I may not be able to get my needle through there. So what I'll do is just sew. These are just fabric right here. I'll just stitch right there and get that on. Okay, so now I have that sewn on, and I just want to do one more little fun decoration down here. Remember, this is going to have a flap down the front that's decorated, so I don't really need a lot on the front, but I found these shoes quite a while ago, and I just thought, I mean, they're way too big for me, and I would probably never wear them, but they're so cool. They're leather, and they have all kinds of beadwork, and the leather's not so thick that I wouldn't be able to get my sewing machine through. So I am going to carefully cut the top piece off and stitch it right here. Now, I used to think when I first started years and years ago that I would need some industrial type sewing machine in order to sew leather. Well, I don't. I just have a very standard Brother machine, fairly inexpensive, and as long as I have a good denim needle, it gets through most leather. You know, something super thick like a belt, it wouldn't, but this, it should be just fine. So I'm going to get this cut out. Here's what it looks like cut out. And now I'm just going to lay it sort of in the corner and pin it on. And this pins very easily, surprisingly, and thank goodness. So I'll get that pinned on, and then I will go to my machine and I will just carefully stitch around that. I might use a green, that's the color that they used on the shoe, and get that sewn on. So this is all I'm going to do to this piece for right now. So I'm going to set that aside in a second. But what I want to do now is create the flap that will be on the front. And I will go back to that pattern that we talked about in the very beginning, the 10 1/4 inches tall and 7 inches wide. And I went back to that brown fabric that I used on the body of the bag, and I just set my pattern on that jacket, traced around it, and cut it out. Now, I want to have a backside to this, and what I'm going to use is, I've already cut on this because I used it for the snippet, but this old vintage hand towel that I thrifted, so cool, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to save this side because I want to use that on the back of the bag for a pocket. But I am going to just lay my pattern down. And it really doesn't matter which side you lay down. So I'll just do it like this. And I will just trace around that and cut it out. My flap on the front will have 2 sides, a front and a back, and this will be the back. Now I have my 2 pieces that match in size. I'm going to set this one aside for a second because what I want to do to the flap right now is I thrifted this cool belt. It looks like a guitar strap. It's sort of a tapestry. And I want to sew that down the sides of my flap here. And so the first thing I'm going to do is there's a metal piece right there. I'm just going to snip that off. And then I'm just going to lay this on there and see what size I want to sew. Now I will use about a 1/4 inch seam allowance, so I want to make sure I don't lay this too close to the edge because I don't want it sewn in my seam allowance. And so I'll just lay the other one down and get those pinned on. And I think I will probably keep this at about 3/4 of an inch from the sides. 3/4 of an inch to an inch. I'll let you know what I end up doing. Okay, so I have these all pinned on, and I just need to sew them on now. They are about 3/4 of an inch from the sides, and I will just I'll probably use a gold thread and just go around the entire perimeter of each belt piece with a straight stitch. Now I have my belt pieces sewn on to the flap, and before I add the lining to the flap, which is this vintage towel that we cut out, I want to add the fringe now. And so since I'm going to add fringe to the sides of this, I might as well cut the fringe for the sides of this bag or the front of the bag and add that on as well. So I'm just going to work on leather fringe right now. Okay, for the fringe, I'm just going to use this brown genuine leather jacket that I thrifted. And I wash and dry mine at home. They're very expensive to dry clean, and when I was selling bags, if I spent $50 to dry clean every jacket I used for leather, it would cut into my profits terribly. So I experimented long time ago, and I've been doing it ever since. I throw them in my washer and dryer. I wash them on cold, and I dry them on a hot setting, and I don't line dry them because they get very stiff. Now, if it's a jacket that you want to wear, do not do that because they will shrink, and once in a while you'll get a little water spot or something on there, but I washed and dried this one and it's just fine for fringe. The first thing I do to get it prepped for cutting the fringe is cut the arms off. And I cut that seam right across the top of the shoulder. And I cut into the collar because I never use the collar on anything. So I'll get this arm cut off and that cut open. Now all I'm going to do is just cut out panels of the leather. I do not want any seams. And so what I mean by panels is I'm cutting inside those seams so that I have a pure piece of leather. See, there's a seam here too, so I don't want to go through that. And now I have a piece of leather that doesn't have any seams. And the sides have nice panels. The arms will have nice long fringe. So I am just going to cut along seams and get as many panels cut out. Actually, this one won't take as much fringe as a lot of my purses do, but I'll get some panels cut out for the fringe. Okay, so here are my panels that I cut, and they range from 17 to 18 inches. So that's about where I want it. So I don't really need to even cut these any shorter because I want really long fringe on this bag. And my cutting mat, so in order to cut fringe, I use just a standard cutting mat, doesn't matter what type, a straight edge, and a rotary cutter. And on my rotary cutter, I order titanium blades. You don't have to. Regular blades cut nice too, but titanium's just extra strong and cut leather really nice. So if you want fringe longer than 18 inches, you're going to have to cut every single strip by hand. And I've done that, and it's hard on my wrist. I have pretty bad tendonitis from doing that for so many years. So I rarely make a purse now that has fringe longer than 18 inches because I want to use this. I do not want to cut them by hand. And so all I do here is just lay my straight edge and do not measure anything here. That would take you forever. And I always cut off the edge, which is crooked and not nice. And then I cut my strips just a little bit over 1/4 of an inch. And I'll just lay it down, cut it, move it over. And they vary in width, you know. Definitely not going to measure this. They just need to be approximate. Okay, so that's what I have. And I will continue. I can't tell you how much fringe to cut. I just kind of eyeball it, and I will just cut up. I probably won't even cut up all of these. We'll see. I ended up cutting all of that fringe. I may have leftovers. So what I want to do now is sew it onto the bag. I want to sew it down the sides of the body of the bag, and I want to sew it down the side of the flap. And how I do that is I do this all at my machine, and I just sew one piece on at a time, and I'll use this side as an example of what I do. So I put this into my machine. About 1/2 inch down is where I'll start my first piece of fringe. And I'll lay right sides together. So I want to see that shinier side of the leather. So I will lay it down on top of my bag, right sides together basically. And I will start about 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch down from the top. Now I'll do this at my machine. I'll put the needle in right there. And this has to be laying on top of the bag. You cannot sew it on like this. It has to be right sides together, laying like this. And then I will just stitch over that, just with a straight stitch. And then I'll add my next piece of fringe. Stitch over that, add my next, until I'm about 1/2 inch from the bottom. I don't want to be sewing over that fringe, so I'm leaving myself seam allowance, 1/2 inch here and 1/2 inch there. And so when I sew them on, a lot of my bag tutorials, I overlap fringe when I sew it. But on the sides, because of the way it hangs, you don't need that much fringe. I just butt them together and I get close. They don't have to be exactly butted together. You know, you can have a millimeter or two distance there. And that's how I'm laying them down, just next to one another. And I will do that all the way down this side, all the way down this side, and down both sides of the flap, the exact same way. I'm just starting to sew the fringe on here, and I'm lining the edge of my bag up with the side of my presser foot right there. And I just have to pick my presser foot up every time I put a new piece of fringe down. I'll lay it down, stitch across it, lift it up, lay another piece down, until I'm all the way towards the end. Okay, so I have the fringe sewn on, and this is what it's looking like so far. I have these two pieces, and now I do want to add one more thing to the bottom of the flap, and I'll show you that. There will actually be a couple more things that I do to this flap, but before I sew the back on, I want to do this. I have this fringe that I cut off the end of the snippet rolls, and what it is just like some mauve colored lace, piece of ribbon, vintage ribbon, a little denim, and I have two little pieces, and I'm going to sew them on the bottom. They won't go all the way across, but they'll be close. And I want that to extend past the flap. So anything that you want on the outside of the flap, you have to sew on the inside of the flap here. I can't sew it on like this because when I sew my lining on, it won't be right. So I have to lay it down right side on top of the flap, line it up with the edge, and the same with this one. And I may stick a pin in there, but basically all I'm going to do is line the edge up with my presser foot, and I'll just do a straight stitch right across the bottom. Now I have these fringes all sewn on. Now it's time to add the back or the lining, whatever you want to call it. And so in order to do that, we want to sew right sides together, but I have all this fringe I need to get out of the way. So I want to find the edges of my flap. So I pull everything in and up towards the middle of the top. And take your time with this. Make sure everything's out of the way here. Okay, so now here are the edges of my flap. I can take this piece. Now it has like a little bleach stain on there, but I don't care. I just think that kind of stuff gives it character. So I'm going to lay this right sides together on top of my flap. This is basically how you assemble the purse too. So the first thing I do is just pin the corners always. And that helps me know if things are lined up nice. Get all the fringes out of the way. And once I have all four corners pinned, I will pin all three sides. I will leave the top completely open where the fringe is coming out. I will pin all three sides, and then I will go to my machine and use a 1/4 inch seam allowance or a little bit bigger. You need to kind of let the piece dictate to you what seam allowance you need, just as long as you're catching everything. So I'll do that, and I will double stitch that. I will go, once it's pinned, I'll sew around all three sides, and I'll sew it twice because that just gives it extra durability. And when I'm pinning the sides and the bottom, I peek in there and I try to go in between the pieces of fringe. Pinning that leather will bend a lot of your pins and be kind of frustrating, so I try to avoid them. Now I have that all stitched, and before I turn it right side out, I am just going to snip these corners at an angle, not cutting into the thread, of course. We just want to get rid of a lot of that bulky fabric. And then I am going to trim fairly close to that stitch line the edges. That's a lot of bulky stuff there, and we want it to lay nice when we turn it right side out. Now I can turn it right side out. And I'm just going to take my time here and push out those corners. And then I will take it over to my ironing board and just give it a good press so that everything's nice and smooth. You can throw a tea towel over top of yours if you're not sure how your fabric will take the iron, but I'm not going to do that. This terry cloth is pretty iron friendly. Just making it nice and smooth. Here's what the flap is looking like. There's the back. There's the front. And this part is still open, right? And all I'm going to do here is I'm going to go to my sewing machine and just right over top. I don't need to hide those raw edges because they will be sewn into the bag and you won't see them anyway. So I'm just going to keep things simple, run this along the edge of my presser foot, and just do a little stitch close to the top here, just to keep that closed. Okay, so the last thing I want to do to the flap is add this belt. I thrifted this beautiful belt with a chain at the bottom, and it has 4 medallions. I only went 3 because this is kind of heavy, and the more I add, the heavier my bag is going to be, and I like to keep them under 4 pounds, preferably under 2. These bags tend to get kind of heavy, so be careful when you're choosing embellishments. So the first thing I'm going to do is I want to get rid of some of this up here. And it is attached with these sort of leather strings, thicker than strings, whatever they are. Okay, so I am going to actually cut these off, and I'm going to cut high because I need some of that to stitch by machine. So I didn't cut at the top where I needed it. I cut higher. Now I'm just going to pull these other pieces off, and I'll still have, I'll show you. I'll still have enough to stitch here. So what I will do is just kind of place it where I think I want it, and I think I want to take off a few more of these beads. And I want it about there. So what I'm going to do is go to my machine and run a stitch over top of these little leather pieces right in the center of my flap. And I'll just run a stitch right over top of that. I actually run probably about 3 stitches over top of that. Now I have this all stitched at the top, and I snipped off the extras. And now what I want to do is hand sew this to my flap. And all your embellishments will be different than mine. So basically you just try to find some places to sew that you think will make the bag secure. And I will use a gold thread because it matches the hardware. Plus, I will see some of the stitching in the back. Not a lot, but so I try to match the thread as best as I can to the back. It's okay if you see a few little stitches. This is handmade and that's unavoidable. So I had a good question from one of my YouTube buddies is when I talk about using gold thread on my jewelry, am I talking about the color gold or do I use gold metallic? I don't use gold metallic. I use kind of a goldish mustard color on sort of my antique colored gold. And so I will just do a needle and thread and I will sit down tonight. I'm about done for the day. My honey's kind of sick. I need to go take care of him. But I will just sew this on nice and sturdy. I sewed this on last night. Super cute. And I'm just going to set these two pieces aside for now. And I am going to start on the back piece. And what I'm going to do here is almost identical. I'm going to start it almost identical as I did the front. I'm going to take the other half of this snippet roll and I'm going to pin it down 1.5 inches from the top and get it stitched on. Okay, so now I have this snippet roll sewn on to the top portion. And what I want to do now is make a pocket for just below that snippet roll. And the pattern I'm going to use is this. It's 6 inches across and 7 inches tall, just a rectangle. And I will use this vintage hand towel for my pocket. So what I'm going to do is just lay my pattern on top of my fabric. Now this has a finished edge at the top and I am going to use that so I don't have to finish the top edge. So I will lay this down right at that line, the edge of the towel, trace around it. Very simple, right? And then I'm just going to cut that out. Now all I'm going to do, I'm at my ironing board, and here is the top, the finished edge. I am just folding the sides in 1/2 inch and giving it a good press with my iron and then pinning them. If this fabric wasn't so thick, I would do this a little differently. I would fold this over twice, about 1/4 inch, just to have clean edges, but this is so thick that I don't really want to deal with that. So I'll pin those down and then I'll come to the bottom and I'll roll that once as well. Now I am going to take this to my machine and I will just stitch those shut. So we have nice clean sides on the front when we sew it onto our purse. And I'll probably stay pretty, 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch seam allowance. I'll just kind of feel it out when I'm at my machine. Okay, so here's my pocket. What I want to do to the pocket before I sew it on, 2 things actually, or possibly 3. I have this fringe. Ooh, the sun's shining in. And it's kind of thick, so I want to sew this right towards the top. I'm probably going to come down 1/8 or 1/4 inch, and I am just going to zigzag stitch that exactly as it is. If this had been thinner, I would fold this end over and make it nice and clean right here, but that's just, I don't want to deal with that. That's just way too thick. So I will just run a zigzag stitch right across the top and then just snip off any extra. Now I have this fringe sewn on, and what I want to do, I have some fringe left over, the brown leather, and I want to run that down the sides of this pocket. I have 10 pieces left, so I'm going to do 5 on each side. So how I do that is I'll take my pocket back to my machine and I will lay these down. Now this is a little different than how we did fringe on the bag. This time I want it extending outside of the pocket. And I only have 5, so I will evenly, as even as I can, place those. And I'll do this, I'll lay these down as I'm sewing. So I'll start my needle at the very top, run it down, lay down this piece outside of the pocket, and then when I get down to here, I'll lay another piece, and so on until I don't ever go right to the bottom. I'll stay about a little less than 1/4 of an inch from the bottom and the top here, and I will do that on both sides. Just a straight stitch. Okay, so now I have my pocket all ready to sew on. And at this point, a lot of times what I'll do is I'll just take some decorative piece and just stitch it to the center. But I think this has enough going on that I don't really need to do that. But that's what I do a lot of times if I need some extra decoration. Okay, so now I just need to pin this onto my bag and sew it. And I will just center it this way. And on mine, I want to come down from the very top, 5.5 inches. So I'll measure each corner, the top 2 corners, just that so that things don't get all wonky and weird when I'm sewing. So 5.5 inches down. And then I'll go ahead and pin down these 2 corners and probably stick a pin here and here. And then I'll take it to my machine and I will just stitch that with probably like a goldish thread. I'll stay very close to the edge because I don't want to lose space in my pocket. Go around these 3 sides and I'll go around it twice for extra durability. Okay, so here's what the back is looking like. Really hippie boho looking, I think. Love it. So now I have these 3 pieces. And now I'm going to start assembling the bag. I'll do a little bit more once the bag is complete, but it'll just be possibly adding beads, things like that. So I can go ahead and put this together. And so I want to attach the flap. You would think I'd attach it to the front, right? But we're going to attach it to the back. This is the back piece of the body of the bag. And what I want to do is attach this right sides together at the top. And I'll show you how I do that. Okay, I'm going to turn the top side this way so you can see better. This is the top of my bag, the back of my bag. And so what I did here was I just took my yardstick and I found the center and stuck a pin in it. And then I did the same to the flap. Found the center and stuck a pin in it. That way I know when I line up these pins that it will be exactly centered. And so that's what I'm doing now. I'm going to line up these pins. I'm going to remove the bottom one there. Take this one and just pin it together. And now that I know it's centered, I can go ahead and pin the rest of this flap down. And I'm just lining it up with the edge of the bag there. And I'm going to finish pinning that. I'll probably just stick one more pin in. And then I'm going to my machine and I'm just simply going to stitch that. And I'll use as small a seam allowance, as small of a seam allowance as I can, probably about 1/4 inch. And I will just start here, go all the way across with a straight stitch, and then I'll do it twice just because this is getting kind of thick and I want to make sure it's extra secure. So I'm going to stitch the flap on. Okay, so now I have that flap sewn on. looks like that at the moment. I want to do one more thing to the front before I assemble this. So I have this hat, and it is so beyond molding. I've tried because I really think it's cute and I've wanted to wear it. It doesn't look too bad on the camera right now, but it's just really bad. So it has this really cool band though, and it's glued on there a little bit. So it looks like this, and it has a little bit of rawhide. I am just going to take my non-sewing scissors and cut that off. And now that has a little knot right here. I'm going to take advantage of that and just leave that knot for now. And I want to sew this onto my bag. And so I can either sew it, this is the front, I can either sew it about an inch away from the side right at the top, like this. But I don't want it to cover up this piece that much. So I'm going to sew it to the side. Remember how we did the fringe? We brought the fringe on the inside to sew it. I am just going to do the same with this. And I might clip off that top piece of fringe and sew this there instead. Let me bring you closer so you can see what I'm doing. Okay, so this is the side I was working on. I clipped that little piece of fringe off at the top. I am just going to go to my machine and I'm going to lay this in that spot. I'm replacing that top piece of fringe with this belt. I'll have to remove some of this glue, it looks like. But anyway, and I'm just going to stitch over that a couple times. Okay, now I have that sewn to the side. I'm going to clip this off. And I don't know in my last clip, did I call that rawhide? I meant raffia. So that's what it is. Okay, now I'm ready to carry on assembling the bag. Okay, now we just have to put the front and the back together. And it looks complicated, right? But really, basically, you just need to get the fringes and embellishments out of the way. And so I just move everything in and up towards the top because we won't sew the top. It's a purse. We want to be able to get into it. So everything's safe up there. And then I normally just take my time with this and just get everything up and out of the way so that I can see the three sides easily that I need to sew. And then I will do the same to the back piece. Now we have this flap and that just comes up and out of the way just like the fringe, and any fringe or embellishments on the back just pull up and out of the way. And now we just put the back on top of the front, right sides together. And that flap is just up here. We won't be doing anything with that right now. And then I will pin these four corners. That's how I always start, just to make sure everything's nice and lined up. Now that I have the four corners pinned, I will just go back in and pin the three sides. Now, when you go down the side where the fringe is, I like to peek in there and I try to avoid that fringe. It will bend my pins. So I just try to find gaps where there is no fringe. I kind of will even move the fringe aside. Just makes it a whole lot easier to pin if you're not pinning that leather. Okay, I will pin all three sides. Now that I have this all pinned, I'm going to take it to my machine, and I will go larger than 1/4 inch seam allowance. I may end up with almost 1/2 inch because of the fur kind of muddling the edges, and then we have the fringe sandwiched in there. I want to make sure I catch everything. So I'll go a little larger on the seam allowance than I normally do. I'll sew around all 3 sides, and I'll go around it twice just so it's extra durable. Now that I have this sewn together, I'm just going to trim it up a little bit. I want to cut the 2 bottom corners at an angle. I just want to get rid of a lot of that excess material so that it lays nice when we turn it inside out. And I'll just take my time and get that trimmed up and come back. Okay, so now that I have it all trimmed up, I'm just going to turn it right side out. This is always fun for me because you really start getting an idea of what the bag's going to look like finished. And I'll take my time here and I'll make sure those corners are nice and pushed out. So this is what it's looking like right now. And what I'm going to do is go to my ironing board, and once I have the corners nice and poked out, I am going to lay a tea towel over top and then just press the sides and the bottom so that they're nice and smooth. Okay. Now it's time to make the strap for the bag, and I want a crossbody and I want to use belts. Now these belts are really nice because they're kind of a macrame and they're easy to stitch through. You don't want to get a belt that's too thick because that'll drive you crazy. And this is the belt that came with the jacket, the leather that I cut. And so this doesn't have any, I want to put this through. And if you're shopping at the thrift store or whatever for belts for your bag, it's just kind of like putting a puzzle together. You have to make sure they fit and all of that. I've used 3 belts, and that's kind of fun too, 3 different styles. So this doesn't have a hole, and I'm going to have to create one. So I just have my hole punch here, and I'm going to make a hole. When you're shopping for jackets, it's always nice if they have belts because you can use that for the strap as well. So I made a hole so that this would fit through. Okay, now I want my belt to be, my crossbody strap to be about 49 inches total. And that is just my preference because I don't like them super long hanging down on my leg. And that is kind of short for some people, 49 inches. You just do whatever suits you. So what I do is I have a mannequin. I know a lot of people don't have a dressmaker's mannequin, but I do, and it's really helpful because I want to take the 49 inches that I know I want for my strap, and I'm going to add 1/2 an inch on each side for seam allowance. So I will just kind of eyeball this to see what I like. So here's the 1, here's the 49. I think I like that. So on this side, I will just cut it off, give myself 1/2 an inch seam allowance. But on this side, since it's that macrame, I am just going to put a line across. I don't want to cut it or it'll start unraveling. So at 49.5 to give myself seam allowance, I'm just going to make a little dark line. So then I know I'll sew it right there. I can cut a little below that. It won't unravel that fast because I don't want to work with all of that at the sewing machine. So, okay, now it's time to sew it onto the bag. Okay, so how I sew the strap is, here's my bag, here's the top. I'm going to open up that flap and I am just going to stick it behind. I'm trying not to rattle that chain so much. I listened to one of my clips and it's so loud. So, okay. So what I need to do is whatever side you choose to start with, you find the side seam that we stitched together when it was inside out. And this is the right side of the bag. It's the outside, the right side. And so you find the right side of your belt. This is the wrong side, and this is the right side. I can tell by the way the buckle is. And I will lay that down right sides together, right over top of that seam, and I will line it up with the top of my bag. Only on this one, I'm going to that dark line. There's the dark line that I drew. I will have that right at the top of my bag over that seam, and I will just stitch over that like 5, 6, 7 times until I feel it's secure. And once I'm done with that side, I'll just make sure my belt is all nice and lined up. We don't want any twisties. And then this one I can go right to the end, and I will find the opposite seam, lay it right sides together, and stitch over top of it. You know, multiple times. You want it durable. This is a big bag. There'll probably be lots of stuff in it, so I want to make sure that's extra durable. Okay, at my machine, and I'm going to remove this front plate, and I will slide my bag over top of this arm here. This is why you don't want the fringe all the way to the top. You don't want to be sewing your strap over top of all this leather fringe. It just makes things extra difficult for you. Okay, and so I am just taking my belt. Here's the line that I drew. I'm going to line that up over the seam, right sides together. And sew over that multiple times. You know, you can back stitch. I always sew to the end and then come back and sew it again. You know, I've tried back stitching, going forward, back stitch all the way back, but it starts to get, the stitches start to get kind of cockeyed. So it's just more neat and tidier if I do it this way. I know my hand's probably in the way. Okay, I'll go over that a few more times and then go to the opposite side and do the same thing. I just want to show you quick. So I have this one sewn on. Now I can cut the rest of that belt off. And it's all lined up with the top. Okay, so here's what it's looking like so far. I had to punch another hole in my strap because it was still too long, and I'm kind of picky about where mine hit me. So now it's time to make the lining. I am just going to use a pair of jeans for my lining in my pockets. These are Lee jeans. I liked the big pockets on the back. I liked the color, and I like that they're a nice kind of heavyweight for jeans. And so I am just going to cut the legs off. Now I want to be careful that I don't get too close to the pocket, because I will be cutting about 1/2 inch or 1 inch around that pocket for the actual pocket of the lining. So I don't want to get too close to that. I just want to cut each leg off, and then I am just going to cut them open so that we have a nice big piece of fabric to work with. Okay, so I'm going to need 2 pieces of denim, one for the front and one for the back of the lining. And so I'm just going to turn this over because I want to mark on the wrong side here. And I will go back to my pattern that I used for the body of the bag, and I am going to lay it down and trace it almost like we did the bag, but this is a little bit different, just a small adjustment. So you trace the bottom and the top exactly like the pattern here. But on the sides, you need to make it a little bit larger. And I never measure this. It would take me forever. I mean, well, it wouldn't take forever, but it's not really necessary. I trace outside that pattern 1/4 of an inch approximately. Sometimes it's a little more, sometimes it's a little less. It really doesn't matter as long as it's close. And then the same on this side. I'll go a quarter of an inch approximately outside of that line. And then once you get that drawn, okay, so this is a 14 by 14. Direction really doesn't matter when it's a perfect square, but it's not a perfect square anymore. This is wider. So make sure at this point you make an arrow which side is up, because you will not remember unless your pattern is directional, and direction matters. Okay, I'm just going to get that cut out. Okay, once I have the lining pieces cut out, I want to add a snap closure. And this is my closure of choice. They're nice and easy to do. And they look like this if you haven't seen them before. They have kind of an innie on one side, an outie on the opposite side, and they have those tabs on the back. And they also come with backs, and the backs look like this. And this is what you use to measure where you want your snap to be. Now these, I believe I measured with my ruler, and these look to be about 16 millimeter. I order mine on Amazon, and these are kind of a gunmetal grayish, gunmetal silver. So what I do is I lay my back where I think it would probably go. That gives me a good start. And then I take my yardstick, since this is long. If it's a small purse, you can use a ruler. But I find the center this way. And so that I have that in the center this way. And then I want it 1.5 inches from the edge here. And I'm measuring that little circle in the center there. So I go 1.5 inches right to that little circle. And I already kind of pre-measured this. So kind of cheated a little bit. I know right where it goes. So now what I'll do, that I have it in the center this way and 1.5 inches down, those two little lines or ovals on the side, I'll make a little mark with my marker there. Okay. And then I also will take a square, and I don't know, these are maybe an inch, a little over an inch, and I will lay my back down on that. Now this one doesn't have to be measured, just try to get it close to the center and make little lines. My marker is about fried. It has all kinds of little fuzzies on it. Okay, so I have this marked as well. Now what I'll do is I'll just fold this where those marks are, and I will make a teeny tiny little snip on them. Do not go too big here or your snap will be loose and you'll have to start all over because it won't work that great. Go smaller than you think you need to. And I'm going to do the same on this little piece of denim as well. And I will choose, it does not matter which side of the snap I want to go in this side. And I will poke those tabs through those slits. Now it's kind of tight, which is just fine. I'd rather it be hard to get through than too loose. I may have to cut this one a little bit more. I err on the side of caution. Okay. Okay. So I have those tabs through. Now I will turn this over to the back side. My arrow shows that's up, but it doesn't matter. As long as it's not this way, I'm fine. Okay. Now I'll lay this piece over top of the tabs, and now I will take the back and lay it over top of the tabs as well. Now, the tabs need to be pushed out or pushed in. I've seen it done both ways. I always go out, and I don't think it matters, but I'll take a tool. These pliers have kind of a rubbery coating, so I like using those. And I'll just push my tabs out on both sides. Okay, and now this is going to shake the camera. I'm just going to give this a tap just to make sure it's extra secure. If you watch my purse videos, you're probably a pro at this by now. I show this in almost every video. So that's what the back looks like, and that's what the front looks like. Now I just have to do it to this piece with the opposite snap. Now I have my snaps done. I want to add a pocket to each side of the lining. I want my lining to have a total of 2 pockets. So I'm going to go to what's left of my jeans, and I am going to cut out these pockets and sew them on. This is super nice and easy. I love it. So I will follow the shape of the pocket. It kind of comes to a point down here. And I will go at least 1/2 inch outside. Now this opens at the top. Just got a text message or something. Okay. So I'll go about 1/2 inch or 3/4 inch above the line here, just so I have something to sew when I put it onto my lining. So I'll get those cut out. Now I have my 2 pockets cut out, and I just want to sew them on to the lining. And so what I'll do is I'll just kind of lay it on here, and I want to center it this way, and this part I just kind of eyeball. But what I do measure is how far. Doesn't matter how far you have it down, but it does matter that these are exactly the same height from the top of the bag, because these can kind of get twisted for some reason when you sew them. So I am measuring 2.5 inches down from the very top of my bag to the actual pocket, not this piece that I cut, but to the actual pocket. And I'll stick a pin in there, and then I'll come to this side and make sure that is also 2.5. And now I will just stick a few more pins around so that it doesn't shift when I'm sewing. And then I'll go to my machine and just sew this on. Now, normally I say go around this twice if you're using a straight stitch, but because it's denim and will fray and things like that, I feel like using a zigzag stitch, and I will use sort of a gold thread that matches the stitching in the pocket. And then since I'm using a zigzag, I really only need to go around it once, but I'll go completely around that fabric that I cut. That's why I left so much there, so that we're not cutting into the pocket at all. So I'll go around that completely with a gold zigzag stitch, and I'll do that to both sides. Now I have my pockets all sewn on, and I just want to put my lining pieces together now. And I will simply lay them right sides together and sew down the sides. I won't sew the bottom and I won't sew the top. And I typically will not pin this because it's just a straight shot. You can if you want. And I will just go to my machine, do about a 1/4 inch seam allowance, go down the side twice on each side with a straight stitch. Okay, now my lining is all sewn on the sides. What I did, I kind of jumped ahead a little bit. I turned this right side out just for a little bit so I can press the seams, because then I need to turn it inside out again. So I turned it right side out, and I went to my ironing board and slipped this over the small end of my ironing board and gave the seams on the side a good press this way on both sides, and then I laid it down and gave them another press with it like this. And now I need to turn it inside out again. And we will prep it to sew into the purse. Okay, so now it's time to put the lining into the bag. And what I need to do, this is the back of the bag. Here's the front. And I need to open up that flap, and I need to lay it behind the bag where it's resting on the back side of the bag. I just need a good open hole there to put to work with my lining. Now I'm going to take my belt straps and lay them down next to the bag, down and out of the way. So both my straps are down along the sides, and I have a nice opening right here. And this is the front of the purse. So I will take my lining piece. Now this is the top because the snap is here. Don't let that arrow confuse you. Okay, so this is the top. This is the bottom. It's inside out, and all I do here is put my purse inside that lining. Or you can say the lining over top of the bag. Now I will reach in here and pull it up. My goal here is to match the top of the purse with the top of the lining. So work with it a little bit here. And what I'll do now is what we want to do is just sew this all around. But to get started, the best way I have found to do is to find the outside of the lining, the seam, and then there's a seam on the inside of the purse that we sewed together. I line those seams up. If you line those seams up to start with, you're sure to get the snaps lined up on the inside. You don't want those snaps all cockeyed and not matching. We want them to be functional. So if we line up the side seams, those line up as well. Okay. Now I'm going, I just broke my pen. Okay, now I'm going to go to the opposite side and do the same thing. I'm going to find that outside seam of the lining and the inside seam of the purse, and I'm going to line those up. Now I can't get a pin through those belts, so I pin on both sides, real close to both sides of that belt. And you want to pin on the outside here. Don't stick your pin in through here. You want to pin on the outside because of the way we stick it in the machine. Okay. One more pin to go here. Now, I know that everything else is going to line up just fine if I have those side seams lined up. Now I will just go along and line up the top of the bag with the top of the lining and pin all the way around. So I'll continue pinning and I will come back. I'm going to show you something quick here. See, here's the flap of my bag. It's all tucked down nicely inside the bag, and I'm just pinning over top of that, almost just ignoring it because I want that to be sandwiched between these two layers. So I'll just pin right over top of it. Now I have the top pinned all the way around, and I'm at my sewing machine, and I remove this front plate, and I just need to stitch this now. So I will slide the whole bag over top of this arm and place it under my needle, and it really doesn't matter where you start. Just don't start on your strap. It's nice to get a good momentum going before you get to a hard part like a strap that's a little bit thicker. And I just line my side of my presser foot up with the edge of the top of the bag here. And I will only go around once because we will top stitch this, and that will be our second stitch. I always double stitch for durability, but you only need to go around once here. And I will just go all the way around the bag. Now I'll peek in once in a while just to make sure everything's still lined up nice. Okay, I'll go all the way around. Okay, so now I have it stitched all the way around the top. Now at this point you can trim any bulk here that you have off down to that stitching. This fur is such a mess that I'm not going to trim mine. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. But what I do now, let me move this out of the way, is just take that lining and pull it back up over the bag so that we can take a look at it here. Okay, so there's my lining. And now we still have an open end at the bottom of the lining. And we need to close that up now. And so what I do is I don't pin or press or anything this part, and you can if you want, but I want to tuck these raw edges in, and I usually start at the side seam, tuck that in, and I will tuck mine in about an inch. For some reason, these get long towards the bottom of the purse and kind of bunch up if you don't close this up kind of with a wide seam allowance. So I will tuck that in about an inch on each side, and I will stick it in my machine, and I'll start sewing, and I will just tuck and sew as I go. Now at this point you can take this to your ironing board and give this a good press and pin it if you are more comfortable doing that. But I've done hundreds of these and I'm pretty comfortable just putting it in my machine and doing it this way. So I will just go back to my machine, stick it in there, and start stitching. And I will line the presser foot up with the edge of my bag. I want the stitch to be sort of small because this is a top stitch basically, and it will be seen. So you don't want to have a big bunch of fabric extending past your seam here. So I try to stay pretty close to the edge. And when I get it all sewn the first time, I'll go back and just stitch it again for extra durability so we don't have holes in our lining and things falling through. Okay, so here's what we have so far. The bag and the lining. And now I'm just going to stick my lining in the bag. And I'm just going to take my time and make sure the corners are lining up. The corners of the lining are lining up with the corners of the bag. You know, just kind of make sure everything's nice and tidy in there. Now at this point, I think almost all my other purse tutorials, we've done a top stitch. This one I'm not going to do a top stitch. Everything's nice and stiff, and I think this will stay the lining in there nicely. So if you want to see how to do a top stitch, I think about probably 95% of the bags that I made and sold, I did a top stitch, but now and then I don't. I think a top stitch on this, since the fur is so thick and I have this belt piece at the edge, I think a top stitch might look messier than, I think the bag would look messier almost with a top stitch, because I would have to kind of jog around some of these things, and my top stitch would not be nice and even across. So I am just going to go to my ironing board, and I am just going to give this a good press, and I'll take you with me and you can watch how I do that. Now you have to take your time here because you want things nicely pressed. It's a little bit time consuming, but it's a very great part of the bag because you're almost all done. So just take your time here, and I will just press little bits at a time. Now you can lay a tea towel over top of yours if your fabric is heat sensitive, but mine's okay. And I will just turn it. I'm going to get that strap up and out of the way. And now I'm just pressing over top of that strap. And I think I will lay a tea towel over this because I don't know what the leather of that strap will do with the heat. So I'll just lay a tea towel down. Let's give that a press. And then I will just keep switching it around, taking my time. Okay, I'll get that all pressed and I'll show you the last thing I do with the iron while I'm still at the ironing board. So now the inside is all pressed, and I laid this out on my ironing board just like if I were to wear it. The flap is nice and down, the snaps are snapped, and I just want to press this very top one more time. And I will lay a tea towel over top of it. I think I need to wash my tea towel. And I will just press that very top portion. Okay, now I want to add a few charms and we'll be done. Okay, so I have my purse hanging on my mannequin so that I can get a better look at it. And I have just some fun jewelry pieces. Now, like, this is just a pendant from a necklace. I think it's a seashell, very thin one. And it has a little ring at the top of it. And a lot of these are just earring pieces. This was an earring. This was a necklace pendant, I think. Couple more earrings here. And what I'm going to do is just tie them onto the fringe. And so what I'll do, I'll decide where I want, say this one. I think maybe I want that right here. I'll take that piece of fringe I want to tie it onto, and I'll cut, I hope you can see this, a little point at the bottom of my fringe so that I can get my little holes through there, the little rings at the top of the jewelry pieces. And I'll just slide that through, stick it to about where I want it, and I will just double tie that. Now, be careful because your fringe, if you tie it too tight, will break. And so just tie it firmly, but do not tug too hard on it so that it breaks. And I am just going to continue tying these throughout the different fringes on both sides. Okay, tying on my last charm. You know, a lot of times when I listed these on Etsy and eBay, I would write in the description, you will be finding little surprises on your purse, new little surprises for days. Okay, here it is again, all finished. And if you've made it this far through this long tutorial, I thank you so much. If you want to see other designs of this basic pattern, stick around. I have a slideshow of over 40 purses after this.